Ready to go? Thank you, Jessica. Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town of Durham Select Board meeting. We have a full quorum tonight, and I want to thank Jessica Lamberg for filling in for Jerry's absence tonight. He's excused from this meeting. I'd like all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, let's see, we have any amendments to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Public comments. I see nobody from the general public here this evening. Old business, we have nothing in the old business section. And I'm going to go right on to new business, and Mike Friendly, please come on up, sir. How are you this evening?
Good. I'm Mike Friendly, run around Pond Road. I'm here as a representative of Royal River again. And we had two suggestion requests. One is to put in a bike rack at Runaround Pond, since there isn't any, and I guess several people have commented that sometimes bikes are strewn here and there. I sent a picture of a representative bike rack that Royal River makes. It's basically a log with some slots cut out and some eyes in it to chain a bike to. We would.
Pretty novel idea, actually. I was looking at it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, not my idea. Someone else's. So we would suggest placing one of those, and I was thinking perhaps by the outhouse there, so it's not near the cars.
Mm-hmm.
And our other suggestion was to, I guess Royal River had some picnic tables donated to it. They're also sent a picture of them. They're these bright blue picnic tables.
Yes.
And we would suggest painting them brown, but it's obviously your decision. If you want them blue, we can leave them blue. There are 5 picnic tables in total at Runaround
Really?
Pond.
Okay. That's what I
And
did.
I felt like 2 of them are not in good condition. One of them has, 2 of them have seat issues, that there's pieces missing from the where you sit, and the top of one of them that's in the woods has the surface of it is showing its age. So our suggestion was to take one of those 2 out and replace it with one of these new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I did see these.
And paint it brown if that's okay with you.
Can we talk about, do we not talk right now?
We
I'm
go.
done.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm
Go
done.
ahead.
I'm
Tom.
done.
Okay, so I actually shared this post that Royal River had made on the All Things Durham page. And there was a large consensus of people that recommended keeping them blue.
I heard, yeah. I heard.
They were donated from
Bruce's Burritos.
Yeah, that is a business that's closed. And they also, I think that the Royal River logo also has this color blue in the Royal River logo, if I'm correct, I think.
It does have a blue.
Yeah. So, I think that if the general consensus is that people feel that it really needs to not be blue and should be brown, we
Well,
could talk about that.
We're
but,
open to whatever you want.
I think overwhelmingly the people that responded to it really wanted to try to honor the fact that they were donated by Bruce's Burritos and keep them blue. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we
Yeah.
make a decision.
I do not care about the color of the picnic tables at all. So I'd be inclined to less labor. Don't paint them. They're good to go.
Josh?
Oh, unless there's a significance to painting them brown, which doesn't sound like there is.
Yeah, I'm impartial to the color. Blue is
They'll match your
fine.
Jeep, Joe.
Exactly, yeah. Rich,
There's nothing I have a concern over. I mean, I think it's very nice whoever donated them,
Yes.
thought of us to have them. Other than that, whatever color they chose,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't have a preference.
I think the only thing,
either.
yeah, Sorry, I think the only thing I'd say is just coordinate with Jerry and maybe Calvin on the placement of the bike rack. Make sure everybody, the two of them are good with that. I mean, I don't see any problem with what you're proposing.
Okay,
I don't think we have to necessarily take a vote on that either. This is nothing,
Yeah, the only thing I can think of with the bike rack is talking to Calvin, so it doesn't end up where they plan to plow.
right, that's what I
right,
mean.
I
Make
think
sure
we
it's
would
in
put
the-
it
yeah.
inside the rocks.
Yeah.
I don't know, if you look at the pictures, there's a picture of the outhouse
Yeah.
abutting that, so it's inside the rocks, so
Yeah.
people
Good.
aren't competing with
Yeah.
the cars.
And I think long-term, like Calvin would be the one that would maintain that, on
Mhm.
behalf of the town. So that's why I say that some coordination with
Okay.
him and Jerry would probably be appropriate.
Okay, I can email them and ask them where they want me to place it.
Yeah. Unless anybody feels otherwise, I don't think we need to,
Is it intended to just have two, or do you think it would be bigger than this?
It would be similar to that. I think Royal River also has ones that have 4 slots, but I think they were thinking 2.
Okay, I just wanted to say that based on the last time that you were here and we were talking about the decking floor for the trails, I really appreciate the fact that you included this picture, because when I was thinking of the bike rack, this is clearly not what
Right.
the image was that came to my
Yeah.
mind. And so,
Yeah, it was.
thank you for sending like an actual representation of what it is that you're planning to do. I appreciate that a lot, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
we really appreciate what you're doing. Thank
Sure.
you.
So leave it blue, is that or is,
I'd say, yeah, it sounds like,
Okay.
that sounds like the consensus is blue.
okay? Great, thank you.
Again,
Works for me.
yep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Mike. All right, that takes care of Royal River Conservation. We thank them again for their thoughtfulness and sprucing up Runaround Pond. Okay, Alan Plummer, have a little download on the sign ordinance this evening.
Hello, Alan Plummer, Code Enforcement Officer. So I get a lot of calls every day, and people ask me questions all day long. And someone called and said, can I put a sign up advertising my thing I want to do? I'm gonna have to look at the ordinance, because I don't know. So I looked at it, and I said, you could put it on your property if you want to sell birdhouses. The question was about birdhouses. You can put it on your property if you want to sell birdhouses, but you can't put it other places other than your property. Unless you get a Maine state sign, and you can get that through the state, put it up. 2 are allowed in Durham, and those are official business directional signs, or OBDS signs. That's a part of the Maine Traveler Information Services Act, which is referred to in our ordinance. So after reading our ordinance, I went to Jerry, talked to George, talked to Calvin. What do you make of this? He said, I don't know, it's confusing. Well, it says no signs, advertising off premises. Right, that's what it says. You better check with someone. So I checked with MMA Legal. I talked to, on the last page of my packet, page 7, Susan Pilgrim, staff attorney for MMA, who in a nutshell said, your ordinance says no off-premise signs. It doesn't delineate from temporary signs, it doesn't say, it just says no off-premise signs. That's what your ordinance says. That's what it means. I said, okay, no signs? She said, well, in fact, it doesn't say temporary signs are allowed. So it says no commercial signs, which means no campaign signs. But before I finish this sentence, I would be very cautious about limiting campaign signs, because you could get in a world of trouble very quickly that way. So that page she sent me, sign 7, talks about the Reed versus Town of Gilbert in 2015. Basically, that determination by the court said pretty much any kind of content that you limit on signs is a no-no. Don't do that. So I've had other people ask me about signs, and I've contacted every person, every company that's put signs out at different places in town. At the end of roads, coming across the bridge, wherever it's not clearly on their property, and said, I believe you're in violation of our ordinance. So I just want to let you know that. And because I talked to the Masonic Lodge, who's had bean suppers here for I don't know how many years, and they put signs all over the place, which are not on-premise signs, I just said, just know that I've told you about that, but I need to talk to the select board, because this ordinance is very difficult to understand. It's very short, but it's difficult. And what I got, the takeaway that I got from MMA was, your ordinance says that no signs are allowed off premise, and that's what it says. And you're reading it correctly. As you read this stuff, those words matter a lot. So they say no off-premise signs, that's what you need to go with, but have your attorney look at this. So I think probably the attorney has looked at this. This is just one example of a difficult thing to comprehend in our ordinance. One very simple example, and boy, have I spent a lot of time on it. So everyone that has signs out there have been notified, and I told them I was gonna come to you, and I'm gonna ask the select board, what would you like me to do with this? And I do have a recommendation. Because this is just one example of an ordinance that is very difficult to understand. And I work with ordinances all the time, and Jerry knows a good deal, and George knows a good deal about that kind of stuff. And we've disagreed about things like this. It's not simple stuff. I would suggest codification by a professional company for our ordinances, frankly. And that only comes to mind because we have, or I think we might have, ARPA money left over. That would be a huge bang for your buck when it comes to a small town like Durham. To get that done to begin with and have them go over it, it's not a short process, it's a lengthy process. Codification would make ordinances not conflict with one another. They look at all the legal language in it and see what conflicts with other things, and they don't step on other ordinances' toes and get sort of duplication. What I realized at one of the towns I've worked at previously was when I was in charge of that ordinance, the land use ordinance, I would make a move and adjust something and inadvertently zip out a couple sentences. Boy, did that change the meaning of this stuff. And that mistake went out there. And I've seen that. I've caught myself making those mistakes. So for a small town to have people that are in my position or George's position, or people that may be here for 3 years or 10 years, or however long, they make those changes, the next person comes in and they make those changes. Those could compound and compound and compound. When you take codification and you have a company in charge of that stuff, and makes ordinances readily available for residents, they can look at their stuff online and see signs, type in signs, and everything related to signs comes up. If it's not understandable with me and George and the town manager, lay people in the town have got to have a hard time understanding what they can do and what they can't do. So, I would like to know what you would like me to do about signs right today. And several people have said, when do we have to do something, and when can we do what we're supposed to do? Because we want to. I said, after the 11th, I'll tell you.
All right.
So,
I'll chime in first here, just because I'm familiar with this ordinance, because it's been the same for many years, almost over 20. I went back to the ordinances before I was even on the planning board. And so this is not really changed in that amount of time. It was made probably before I even got here into town. Even Alan and I aren't in full agreement of what the interpretation is on this. I don't disagree that this can be interpreted a couple different ways. For the signs itself, I agree that it probably could be cleaned up some to make it easier for folks. I think my opinion at this point is that the folks in town can't go wrong by following the main Traveler Informational Act, Services Act. It does cost money, I do realize that. I also realize that if we took on the signs ourselves, we would probably put a fee, and it might even be larger than what the state's asking for at this point. And so, without going into the details of all this, you know, it is probably something that we do need to go back to our legal counsel to get a read from them as well, to see what, if they agree fully with MMA. I suspect this was written by them originally.
By MMA.
No, by our lawyers and probably, I'm gonna guess, Mr. Dan Feeney, back when he was CEO, is where this ordinance originally came from. And I'm only guessing at that, but I suspect, because we did have an ordinance change back right before I got in here, back in '99 or something like that. So it was quite some time ago. But I'll, Joe?
So my question is, what can we even do? Because if there's an ordinance, I mean, I don't think we have the power to say, well, we're not gonna enforce this ordinance in town. And I think it isn't a good precedent for us to say we're not enforcing an ordinance and picking and choosing, because that can show that we're kind of overstepping our power. At the same time, you know, personally, I think that people should be able to put up a sign saying, you know, my business is this way, especially if they are, you know, maybe it's their friend that owns the property and says, yeah, no problem putting it on my property as well. So I don't want it to seem like we're like preventing businesses from being able to say, hey, business this way, but at the same time, I don't know what we even have the power to do in this situation.
In regards to that, I will say that there's a legal aspect of placing signs that if you interfere with a roadway or sight lines and you cause an accident, and if this is gonna become a town, that's why the lawyers need to really look at. So putting them on friends' property, no offense, is somewhat interesting, but it's really, this is intended to prevent that from happening, so we don't have an issue. And that's kind of what the genesis of these sign ordinances, if you look at the various towns in the area, they all have slightly similar ordinances, maybe not as restrictive, but they all cite the state main travelers, and they all go back to having some type of ordinance, some way more restrictive than us, but, you know, and some of them take it upon themselves to do all of it. But still, when you start talking about the roads, it has to go to the state. That's the only problem I see there.
Yeah, and so again, the first part of my thing there is, are we even within our power as a select board to do when it comes to ordinance enforcing? I don't think we get to pick and choose which ordinances we enforce. We kind of have to deal with what we have, you
Right.
know?
Right. And right now, I think what Alan's done is the correct methodology to at least inform folks that they are potentially in violation, and that we need the lawyers to take a look at this ordinance and give us a read. And again, to see if they completely agree with MMA's interpretation of this or not. And then at that point, that would be the decision maker until we come back and revisit the ordinance from a potential, you know, upgrade or, you know, along with the rest of the ordinances, if we were to go the ARPA route. That would be a different subject to have a discussion on.
It seems like the person from MMA is saying that it seems like our ordinance does address commercial signs. So what about with that? Are you saying go to the town lawyer and ask about even that?
Yeah, because I think what the problem is that in item B, it says no signs advertising goods or services shall be located off-site of the lot on which the related services or goods are to be sold or located. It does have an exception clause there, but MMA is not acknowledging that in their write-up.
And what's the exception clause?
Except as provided for in this ordinance section, which would be the rest of it, which sends you to the main traveler information, OBDS.
So, because the way I read that is you can't have a business sign in town unless you follow except in this situation, which drives you to only official signs. So the way I read that is saying you can't put a business sign out unless you do an official business sign with the state. So
Exactly.
that seems fairly clear to me.
It is clear,
And,
but they don't agree with the exception clause in line B, and that's the problem. That's where the
Well, MMA
difference
said
is.
that, they pointed me to the Main Traveler Information Services Act, which encapsulates the official business directional signs.
so the
So
way
it's
I'm
part
reading
of
it,
it.
they're saying that
It-
when it comes to commercial signs, they are saying,
Well-
you can't have commercial signs unless you refer to the state law. And then the state law says you can have them on the official post. That's how I'm reading it.
But everything's a commercial business. Go ahead, Rich.
I'm probably the only one that's ever bought one of these signs
Yeah.
helping this room. The first thing you have to do before you send it to the state is go to the local code officer.
Mhm.
He has to sign off on it saying that it's allowed,
Mhm.
and then it goes to the state. And you have to pay a sign company to make the signs, and the DOT/Department, I think it's the Department of Transportation,
Yeah.
It is.
actually
It
comes
is.
out and hangs the signs. And they have to be within a certain intersection of your business. So you wouldn't be able to put them on your friend's lawn, you wouldn't be able to put them anywhere in the town. They have to be basically directional signs within the vicinity of your business.
And they will place them, they will
They place
put them, and they
Mhm.
maintain them on town roads or state roads.
They maintain them if they get in trouble. They don't maintain them if your logo gets worn off. You gotta maintain it. It's yours, you buy the sign.
Yeah.
And you update it every year, the
And
same, it's a.
You have to pay every year for the
Every
fee.
year. for
And the
the
cost
update.
is about $250 to $350 for one of those signs. That's what I've got for a quote, and it's $30 annually to the state.
Yeah, to buy the sign. Yeah, it
To
depends-
buy the sign.
It depends how many colors you put in it. I think
Yeah.
the last one I bought was $150.
Joe?
So the question is about, we have people who are putting up signs saying, you know, my business this way. And I've seen them on town. There's other people who have them at intersections saying, this service offered, you know, they look, the temporary sign just put in the ground. Is your question what to do about those signs?
I can tell you what the next step is.
'Cause-
And you said what I thought you were gonna say,
Mhm.
because I don't think you can pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
My next step is, and I'll probably do this tomorrow. I'll probably do this
Can
tomorrow.
I interrupt for one
Yes.
second?
Yeah.
I think you can pick and choose if legal counsel says you can't do that, you can pick and choose not to do that, despite what the ordinance says. I just want to make that crystal clear.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so, yeah, I'm not
'Cause-
gonna
'cause I've
tell
heard-
anyone
I've
about
heard that
campaign
tw- I've heard
signs.
that a few times, and I've been trying to keep my mouth shut, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. My intent is, first of all, what does the town want with this ordinance? And then go forward with that. Yeah,
Heather?
yes.
I'm gonna convolute this conversation a little bit, and I apologize for that, but just correct me if I'm wrong, and that's fine. When I'm reading through this, right, it says no sign, and then it refers us to, the Main Traveler Informational Services Act, right? And then you specifically highlighted out the temporary and under the categorical sign. And so, what I wanna understand is, there's directional there are the signs that we're seeing everywhere that are just advertising a business with no direction, right? And then there are signs where they're not specifically naming a business, but they're pointing to a subject matter and a direction. And so when I'm thinking about the direction for travelers, I do feel like those directional signs relate to this temporary categorical sign, which falls under the thing that our ordinance addresses. And so I just wanna make sure that when we're talking about we can't pick and choose, I do think that there is a difference, because some of those signs are specific for travelers and directional, whether or not, you know, they're meeting the requirements in terms of safety and whatnot, that's a different thing. But then we also get down to the like outside of the public right of way. And so if that's the case, I just feel like that part of the conversation does need to be addressed also.
So the reason I put the categorical signs in there and highlighted the temporary signs is, I was asked that specifically. Going back to no signs doesn't delineate temporary or permanent signs, period. Those temporary signs are, for our purposes, are campaign signs. They're
Okay.
not other signs like are showing up on the streets of Durham. So that's why I highlighted that, I just wanted to make a note. We don't,
Can you say that one more time?
our ordinance doesn't allow any signs,
Right.
temporary or permanent. The reason I highlighted that was someone asked specifically, well, temporary signs say these things. And it does say things that sounds like, some signs are permissible. But we don't allow temporary signs.
And I'm not trying to argue with you, when I'm reading this, I'm seeing, I see signs may be erected and maintained under the Maine Traveler Informational Services Act to identify and point the way to public accommodations and facilities, commercial services for the traveling public, and points of scenic, historical, cultural, recreational, educational, and religious interest. The second line of the legend may be used to indicate additional directional information such as the street name. And so when I'm thinking about a service that is, I'm trying really hard not to use a
That's a
specific.
DOT sign though.
Yeah, to me
That's
that reads
yeah.
like gas stations this way,
That's what I was talking about.
restaurants
Okay,
that way,
okay,
just like
so-
the logo of the
Yep,
gas.
and I agree with that, except this is specifically referring to 1901 to 1925. And 1913A is in that 901 to 925. Am I wrong?
You're in, yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so that's specifically referring to that, and that brings in categorical and temporary. As long as it's a business, it's a direction for the traveling public, right? So I think that's where the picking and choosing, I'm sorry that might fall to you, and I do agree that we should get a legal opinion about it for sure. But I do think that there is a difference between some of these signs that we're seeing that are a service for the traveling public versus a service that people are just trying to advertise their business.
Well, and to even go even further there, that 1913A does say types of signs outside of the right of way, so it's like if it's on your lawn and not in the public right of way, like if I put up a sign that says business this way, on my lawn, it's okay. If it's on the public right of way, it's different.
And you gotta tie it back to the land use ordinance, because if it's a business, and it's a home-based business, that's a commercial type business that we already have an ordinance for. So the signs that we're talking about are all business related, even if you're pointing to the fruit stand. It's what we categorize in our ordinances as a business. So when we get into, well, we just want to point here seasonally to, get some corn, that's a business. And it should be registered in our town, and we should have an application for it. And the ordinance should then allow a sign out front and signs down the street, and you follow the Maine state ordinances for the signs down the street.
Right.
So it's
except-
not, so
except that-
it needs to be the same across the board.
I
There's no
agree with
difference in the temporary. I agree that if it's more restrictive and restricting political type or those types of signs that are categorized as we can't really govern, and they're only allowed up for so many days around the time of
And that's the
the
temporary
event. That's in there, right?
So-
That, go ahead,
But isn't
Josh.
the easy fix for this just to remove
No.
everything in subsection G after 1925? And then it calls, then you can have a sign
Yeah.
that fits the statute. And then we don't have this issue anymore, right?
Maybe, yep,
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
and then the
Everything-
issue is whether the statute's constitutional or not,
right.
which is something legal counsel can give, which
So
is
are
a
you-
very simple
You're
yes or
saying
no.
eliminate everything after his highlight?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And then it's any sign allowed under that act.
right.
And that gets rid of this whole question, which is political signs, business signs, what's the
That
difference?
solves that part of the problem.
Rich, but like we can't eliminate an ordinance.
That's-
No, it
And
has
so
to
that's
go-
where it goes back to
right.
the original question.
Gotta go
Is there
back.
even anything that we can do right now? it seems like the answer is no.
No.
That the ordinance has to be enforced as is, and then, but we can make a suggestion, say, you know, cause there's a business that has a sign that's at a corner and just says.
But we should be asking for a draft,
Yes.
because there was a talk earlier about whether we need to have another special town meeting
Mm-hmm,
for ARPA funds for something, if one comes up, we can have it prepared.
yeah,
That would be my only thing.
and I think that I would agree that clearly we need to do something, but it would be to ask for a draft or something like that.
Rich, you have anything?
Yes, for me, I mean, we're talking about an ordinance that's been in the books for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I hate when all of a sudden we find this eureka moment, and all of a sudden we come to this conclusion that, you know, we've been illegally operating essentially, or not enforcing something for over 20 years, and then we just want to hit the brakes as fast as we can. I think it's a little bit more in depth than just saying, hey, we're going to enforce this ordinance from here on out. I think there needs to be, like Josh indicated, some more research and due diligence with our personal attorney. And I think in the time, I mean, we can drive by, we can go down pretty much any street in the town of Durham and find some type of ordinance violation or a code violation. We don't tend to do that. So I think we need to put some more due diligence in this before we move forward with anything.
So my only question with that is, I understand that there's precedence, you know, and obviously I don't think it's any great use of anyone's time to drive around and mark where all the signs are that might be breaking the rules or whatever. But what do we say to someone who's calling and saying, so-and-so has a sign up at the intersection of these two roads, right below the stop sign advertising their business. I took mine down because I thought I wasn't allowed to. I'm not saying I disagree with the sign being there, but what do we do for those people? Do we say, well, for 20 years, we haven't enforced the sign ordinance, we're not gonna start today?
I didn't say we're not gonna start.
No, I'm not, I'm asking, or are we saying, you know, we're working on it right now, give us this year, we're
I
not
think-
gonna make a big deal out
I
of
think there's a
it?
couple signs, like, for example, people that build houses, or people that maybe are getting a service. Let's say you're
Mhm.
getting a new air conditioner.
Yeah, you put the
And
sign
you
on
live
your
on a
lawn.
side street, and they'll put maybe one in your yard, and they'll put one maybe on the crossing intersection, so the people that know that are delivering whatever go to that particular site, maybe
Mhm.
the electrician. Home builders are notorious for this.
Mhm.
They'll put it on a corner intersection, and they'll put one in the front yard so people can find, whether it's the roofer or the whomever. I don't have a problem with enforcing anything, but the problem is we haven't, and it just goes, it sets, to me, for example, if we have an election tomorrow, are we gonna let people put up election signs?
Mhm.
We
Yes, because our attorney said you will
Right.
have to let.
Yeah, you will, because the attorney said so, but our ordinance doesn't say that we should, right?
Correct.
That's my point.
I thought the ordinance
Yeah.
pointed to the temporary signs during the time of certain time of
The
year.
temporary,
signs.
so the temporary signs, it refers to that,
Yeah.
but still they're not allowed, for
Right.
the wording of
Yeah,
our
line
ordinance.
B doesn't allow it.
It doesn't allow.
Right.
Yeah, and your
But that-
counsel said that,
Not our
Right.
council.
well, the
I
person that you heard from
disagree.
said,
I think,
I
I do too.
I really
I think it does
disagree.
allow.
It says, except as provided for in this ordinance section. And then in this ordinance section, it says, under the Maine Traveler Information Services Act 1 through
But
25.
it's limited, that section is limited to certain things, which is why I said if you get rid of that second part,
Right.
you're fine.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
And I agree with what you said, how do you enforce it? But,
right.
you know, I think the first thing we have to do is get
Legal advice.
an ordinance that's constitutional,
Mm-hmm.
and then figure out, you know.
I think this is a case of we don't know, we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
And I think we're opening up potentially Pandora's box here. I think we should just do the right thing and get the advice of our council and say, hey, yeah, I think this ordinance needs to be looked at and you guys should change it. We recommend changing it to X, Y, or Z. Shoot that up the flagpole, and we have the town.
So I have a question. Can we put a temporary moratorium on enforcing this or something like that when we realize there's an issue like this? Because we don't know what we don't know. But we do know that there are some signs out there right now that are violating the town ordinance. And I don't want us to have this back and forth and then Alan leaves and goes, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell him to take the signs down. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell the person it's okay. So what is our direction here?
I think-
Can we say, we haven't enforced it for 20 years, we're not gonna start now, but we realize there's a problem? Or do we, and then, in theory,
There's
everyone
We-
puts a
we-
sign up everywhere, you know?
We can direct Alan
Yeah.
not to enforce the statute, I think that's part of our,
I didn't know if that was,
yeah.
cause what other, like, I thought that we were given the ordinances and it was our job to see them through, not us to decide after the ordinance is voted in whether we wanted to direct it to be enforced or not. So that's where I'm just
It's
asking.
actually his job to ensure that
Yeah.
goes through.
So I think where, like what Josh is saying, is that if we know that the ordinance doesn't comply,
Mm-hmm.
then we shouldn't be enforcing that if we know that enforcing it is not in compliance. Correct?
So, yeah, I mean, I think the direction is go to legal, get the read, and hold on enforcement till we get that read. I think that's the direction that we need to go in, and then
I'm okay with that direction.
come back to us
That's
with
the
what
right
you
direction.
find, that
Yeah.
is the direction.
I agree with that,
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure we're allowed to do that, we're allowed
Yeah.
to say, we're not gonna enforce a certain ordinance
Yeah,
until
We haven't been
figure-
enforcing it,
We
other
haven't.
than him
Right, no,
calling up.
I totally
So-
understand we haven't been,
So in
but,
the meantime, then, if he gets some phone calls this week about it, he's gonna have to wait and say, I'm contacting legal to find
Mhm.
out. And then I'll get you an answer in the next
Mhm.
couple of weeks.
Works for
And
me.
that's just the, I think the way we have to go. Heather?
I just wanted to add one more thing to what you had brought up before, and I think that, this is the answer to the same question for many different parts of our ordinance. And so I would be interested in, seeing some sort of proposal to have codification done. Who does that and what that looks like in terms of cost.
And I think that's probably one of the things on our bucket list to have done over time, that we need to prioritize.
Just, Jess, you might know this if you don't mind, Phil, and Pownell just had this done, what was approximately the cost?
I can tell you approximate cost.
Yeah, approximate.
So, Mechanic Falls had it done, I think it was $7,000 for them.
I was gonna say that I thought Pownell was 8.
I'm there are 4 or 5 companies that do it that I'm aware of. I think a ballpark number is 10 to 15,000.
For the
That might be
entire
high.
ordinance package.
The whole thing done, and it's not a couple month thing, it's a year.
No, 10's the number though.
Yeah.
See, if it's under 10,
We can do
we
that.
can do that.
right,
If it's over 10,
Yeah,
it's
no,
gotta
I
go to
get it,
town.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
what can
bring
we
us
get for
that proposal,
$9.99, you know?
Yeah.
Please, and thank you.
Mr. Talbot,
I guess my
please.
question is,
Are
what are
we
you going
looking
to
for public
codify?
comment?
I've seen that done before.
As an officer, I think
Yeah,
he's
so
fine.
if you're gonna codify the existing ordinance, you're gonna codify a lot of issues with that.
Mhm.
And not to say that that's not a good first step, but as Alice said, are you just codifying confusing issues? It's not as simple as just typing signage and finding 2 or 3 references right throughout there. So I just thought, so then, is it more than $10,000?
I don't disagree.
I
Thank you.
support doing it, that's just.
Isn't it 2 parts?
Thank you, John.
Initial fee and then there's you can keep the
Yes.
review.
So what I know is, once you get codification underway and they go through the entire documents, whatever they are, they put those onto an electronic format, which is searchable online. And then annually, whenever you have legislative changes, you either send them to them directly, right after you make the change, or once a year, you send them all the changes for that year.
Right.
And they immediately tie those in. There's a temporary section. They can put something in there that, wow, this is an annual meeting, so. Yeah, that won't apply here.
Could you send us also a reference link to a town that does that or has that service available? Like so what you're saying is part of a town's website is that a resident could go on our website and do that. So if you could
Yes.
just refer us to a town's website that we could look at that shows that, that would be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
The legislature.
Mm-hmm.
They had a link.
There are quite a few in Maine that have done that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's an important thing that we do, I just wanna make sure we're not overstepping
Mhm.
when we do stuff and show that we're being consistent and all that, so.
Okay.
I think if it came back, like if we, let's say it was $7,000 and we do have the authority to authorize having this work done, and then it comes back and it's like, this is all way too ambiguous, and you need to actually change this ordinance in order for it to work with this and this, then those changes probably need to go to a vote to make happen.
Yeah, but I think
but-
that would bring up a larger problem that's, but still very important to address, is that if we have ordinances that are hard to understand, don't make sense, and then we find out we haven't been enforcing them correctly for 20 years, we wanna figure out what that is, so then we can start the process of fixing
Yeah,
that.
I do wanna be careful. I think our ordinances are not as bad as everybody does think. I know that ordinances and requirements are sometimes hard to read for people. I'll use the word lay people. I understand we wanna make them as simplified as possible, but when you simplify something, it also takes away what the real meaning of that ordinance is. It's no different than government requirements. They're very specific, and these are intended to be very specific, and in a lot of cases, people normally get a lawyer to go through a lot of this stuff. It's not really, not necessarily intended all the time for a lay person to be able to understand it all. It needs to be technical in nature. So some people just don't have that capability, which is okay. Some people do, and they can read through it. So I want to be careful not to water it down too much.
And-
We do want it, we want it specific enough to be able to get exactly what the town wants out of the ordinance, and not, not just to make it so everybody can read it either,
And
so.
I'm not saying that we need to
Yeah.
water them down, I'm just
Yeah.
saying that it's probably important for us as a select board to understand them all and enforce them
Mhm.
correctly, cause
Yep.
where I see it as from the public looking in, they're saying, well, here are the rules of town, except for this one that doesn't get enforced, and then this one that does, and then, we have new people moving in, so they say, I read all the rules and I did what I was supposed to do, and how did I know that this is one that you don't enforce, or this is one that you do? So, I'm not accusing anyone here of picking and choosing which ordinance we enforce, I'm just saying, it could be an issue for people, the public, if they're saying,
It's definitely an issue related to home-based businesses, for
Yeah.
sure.
and just that clear guidance for a new business that wants to start up, or something like that, is important to me.
We good with signs?
Great.
Thank you, Alan, appreciate it.
Thank you. I look forward to that information coming
Yeah.
back. I'm invested in this, so thanks.
John, good
Mr.
evening.
Chairman, members of the board, thank you for seeing me this evening.
Sure.
And for the record, my name is John Talbot, 636 Stackpole Road in Durham. And speaking of ordinance changes, that is why I am here before you this evening to, as you know, we've been talking about what changes do we want to make to, or need to make, to ordinance, or want to make. And so the planning board and George and some of the committees have been thinking about it, working on it, and I just kind of want to give you an update on where we are on those issues. So the big one, number one, is housing, and I don't like to use the term affordable housing because, as I've said before, that's not what we're going to do. It's not necessarily going to make anything more affordable in Durham. It may or may not. So as you are aware of, the legislature extended the deadline from a couple of days ago to the 1st of July 2024. So that bought us some breathing room, and what we need to do is, if we want, come up with something that would take effect next July 1st, or actually after the town meeting, I guess it would take effect. So they extended the deadline, made a few minor changes. We are still sort of waiting for the official verbiage of the changes from the Office of Economic and Community Development, but I think we've got a lot of the information we need to go forward. And so some kind of general parameters are that we have a long pole in the tent, for lack of a better term, which is really kind of George, the town planner's time. And so as we've been looking at the various issues that are before us, it's a question of what can the town planner get done? And he's working very hard, but he's limited in the hours he's got. What can the planning board do? And then we've talked to a couple of other committees, commissions. What can we use Conservation Commission the way we did last year with resource protection, which I think worked at the end. The process worked very well. The appeals board, and I'll explain why there are questions or concerned about that. Historical as well, historical commission, that's been an issue that's been bouncing around for, I think, 2+ years. So I'll kind of go through that. And so what we think we've got is a plan that gets us from now to town meeting that first Saturday in April. The process being, we're developing the changes during the summer, and we being pretty much George on most of this stuff, the town planner. He's way ahead, I think, on a lot of this stuff. He's put together some draft proposals for some of the changes we've got. The various boards, committees will look at it over the summer. And then after the fall begins, after Labor Day, we'll start what's called the public input process. And a lot of you attended our meetings, but back last October, we had one on housing, conservation had one on resource protection in December. And so that's kind of get the town's input, get the residents' input, and here's what we think housing should look like. What do you, the residents, think, how do we tweak this? We get that public input, various commissions and the planning board / the committees come back to the planning board sometime in January, say this is what we think it should say. And the planning board will, I don't want to say an overwatch, but will be inputting, being involved with the various committees, boards, commissions. In the interim, we put together a draft at the planning board. We have a public meeting, public input, but not a formal public hearing. We send you the draft article. You all, as you did with resource protection last year, yay or nay on it, or give us your ideas. Comes back to planning board for a formal public hearing, and which is, I think, no less than 7, no more than 30 days before the town meeting. And it goes before the town meeting. So kind of following is, if you all were involved in, excuse me, the resource protection thing, which of course housing died before we got to those last couple of months. So that's our plan. So the topics, and I'll be looking forward to, the attorney's opinion on signage, because that's, if you want to make changes to the ordinance, that probably has to come back through the planning board, and depending upon the extent of the changes, because we're pretty well tapped. In my opinion, I think what we're going to talk about tonight briefly is we're capable of doing it, depending upon what comes. If it's as simple as eliminating one sentence, whatever it may be, that's probably, it's never easy, but it's doable. If it's redo the signage ordinance or the part of this, first off, I hate signs. And secondly, I hate signage ordinances, haven't been on the other side of all that. So that would be something we take into consideration, is how much, if the lawyer comes back and says, start all over and do it before the town meeting, that's a much bigger effort than what we're talking about. So what are we going to recommend? What we're going to work on this summer is housing. And so George has put some proposals together. The planning board last night gave him feedback on, what his ideas. And I won't go into detail tonight because I don't think we're there yet on what we're thinking about on any of these. So, but I'll give you, so what we think we're going to have is something that meets the state rules, but it has kind of a Durham spin on it. So, and going back to, if we don't do anything on 1 July 2024, we follow the state rules, and so, which are probably more onerous than what we'll come up with over the next few months. So housing, that's a big one. That'll be time consuming. That has a lot of, we'll get a lot of feedback, a lot of input from the town. We heard a lot of good things. We did that survey last year, and what we think we're going to come up with is something that takes, if you remember, we did the survey and about 51% said, make locks bigger, make it harder to do this. About 48% said, hey, we really want to make it easier for our kids to come back, or our parents to stay on the property. So we're going to try to tweak it as hard or as impossible as that may be, and it'll never be a perfect solution. But as we go through this, obviously we'd be interested in your input, but that's a major input or part of the planning board. We've gone back to the town attorney about fees. And I'm not a big fan, I've got to say this the right way. What we need to decide is, I think you do, but there's a question about if there's still a question for some reason, if it's not listed in the ordinance now, do you have the right, the selectmen have the power to do that? And there's a disagreement between me and maybe some others. I think you do.
but as an example, mailbox fee. And if you want to tell me you have the power, I'll stop right, believe me.
I thought,
Didn't we get,
We
There
have
was
a legal,
definitely-
we
there
got a
was
legal
definitely an
opinion on
answer.
that.
There was definitely a legal answer that said that the select board does have the ability
Yep.
to assess a fee if one doesn't
Just
exist.
once a year, I believe.
yeah, at the,
Right.
yeah.
But we have we definitely have the
Exactly.
we
authority.
have
and
the authority
ability to
for
do it.
that, yeah.
So, and if, we may do nothing then, in which this is something still to be resolved in terms, go ahead, John. sorry.
There was a second part to that, though, that I don't know if we got to the final answer, which was the, whether in the ordinance you had to call out if your fee needed to match the ordinance exactly. That was the more clarifying
that is the
question
one that
I'm
is
not
some-
sure we got the final answer on that, but I don't recall. I'd have to.
My opinion is you do, but if there is some concern that you don't. But
I'm with you there, but go ahead. keep
if the
going.
attorney comes back and says, no, you have to somehow list mailbox fee as
Yeah.
the example,
Yeah.
then what we'll do for the town meeting is we'll put together a list of all the fees.
All the stuff, right?
And somewhere, it will be a one-liner somewhere in the ordinance that says the fees are set by the town meeting, see the
Yeah.
fee schedule.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that should not
That shouldn't be an issue.
be a
right.
hard
No,
one.
I agree.
So, although I've already spent a lot of time talking about that tonight. Conservation Commission has said they would step to the plate as they did last year and help us with solar and cell ordinances. We really have nothing in our ordinance. So if someone wants to come in and do a solar project, and there's nothing that we say specifically about solar standards. And so how tall can they be? What's the buffer? How do you buffer noise? Apparently solar makes lots of noise. And how do you do that kind of stuff? And so, and cells sort of the same way. And so we would have, right now, it's up to non-conforming use, conditional use. The board kind of says, yeah, we don't like what you've done here. We want more buffering, whatever. What we're gonna say is, this is the buffering. And, if you're on 136 in a big open field, maybe the buffering's greater. All those details are to be determined. And George, on both this, there are lots of ordinances out there that are working. Farmington, Auburn, some towns have done good ordinances. So I don't think we have to start from
Now
scratch.
I can pull that word.
The guidance we've given to the Conservation Commission is, what we have the ability to do this year, I think, is come up with sort of what I would call the technical standards. Not how many, what size is the switch box, but what are the setbacks, what are the heights, how do you buffer noise, aesthetic, those kinds of things. And so that's what we're asking them to do, is take a look at those things. And so the next step may very well be, where do we as a town want or not want a solar field to go? And that may be a 2025 more research effort. And I think there's enough, two things. One is, there's only so many places that solar works, either because of sun direction or the power line on Stackpole, I don't think, can take a solar plant without a huge, as an example, investment. But that would come down the road. We would still look at, is it in resource protection? Is it next to historic structure? All those kinds of things would still be considered by the planning board. The next one that came up sort of as a result of the resource, is the appeals board. And I should say that George and I have worked with all of the chairs of these boards, and George more than I. So we've talked about these issues with Jessica and Conservation, Barb Schneider on appeals. On appeals, the thing that came out of resource protection was, our ordinance now says that if it's up to 30%, if you want to do something to your use that increases the 30%. So if you want to add a sun deck to your house and you're in resource protection, if it's less than 30% addition, the planning board approves it. Over that, the appeals board uses it. For these particular houses, what we want to try to do is make it a little bit simpler, so that if it's less than 30%, so if you got a 1,500 square foot footprint and you want to add a sun deck of 200 square feet, that would be less than 30%, the code enforcement person would do that. And we're blessed with a good, great code enforcement guy. If it's over that, then it would come to the planning board. And it would take it out of the appeals board process. At this point, I think they're fine with that, the appeals board, and they would be willing to transfer that decision-making to the planning board. And then, so then more to follow on that. And then historical commission, we've met with Lois Kilby Chesney on that. They've already done a lot of work on this. And so they are, I guess, they've made some progress on that. I'm gonna meet with them at their meeting in August 10th, kind of find out where they are on all that stuff and offer the assistance and do that. At the end of the day, if any of these, going back to appeals, it looks like the planning board may take on this appeals changes as well. And again, we're coordinating that with the appeals, Barb Schneider. And historical is taking it on. If any of the commissions goes rogue, if for lack of a better, or really gets out there and we as a planning board don't think it's supportable, then when it comes to us to forward on to you, we will hopefully never get to that point. And we didn't in resource protection, we work very well together, and I don't see that changing. But we're not sort of totally giving up the thing. And of course, anybody has I believe, the right to write something up and give it to you as a selectman. So I think I've quickly covered everything that's needs to be done, if there's any questions.
I just want to clarify, so the appeals and then, when we're talking about that, are we talking about the people that there were recent changes to resource protection? Or this isn't a policy about people that just went in or came out? This is an ordinance change? Is that correct?
Yes, there are 35, George has done a survey, and he's counted them, he believes there's 35 properties that are impacted. Some were in resource protection, others are newly added to resource protection. So whether I've been in resource protection for 10 years or I've been in resource protection for 4 months, but I want to add a structure, and all we're doing is kind of shifting who approves
Makes
it.
the decision.
So we're not necessarily, so, you know, if somebody comes in and says, I want to put a whole new structure, and it's 80% of whatever exists, we come to the planning board, and then it's not necessarily, a lot of factors impacting it. Is it already damaged property? But I don't want to get into specifics, but to answer your question specifically, it's those 35 already were in or just recently were
When you
put
say
in.
35, you mean 35 building footprints that were added in that now have resource protection? Because it was 300 something properties that had resource protection.
But we're talking the structures.
Right, so I was just clarifying, that's what you meant when you said 35 properties added in.
Yeah, sorry,
Just for new
there's
business.
35 structures.
And the current process is if you want to put in a structure of 30% that increases the footprint by 30% or less, it's just you go to the planning board, correct?
Correct.
And that's just, we have that framework, 1,500 square feet, you can add 500 square feet. The current structure would then be if someone says, I want to expand my house by 50%, they would have to go to the appeals board because they're appealing the ordinance. And what you're suggesting is that the planning board would handle the appeal of the ordinance instead of the appeals.
Yeah, and yes,
So,
petition. So all it really does is it changes, and I think what the appeals board felt, that the planning board is better suited to look at.
handle appeals?
Well, not appeals, but to look at whether the impact.
What is, it's an appeal of the ordinance. You're saying I disagree with the ordinance, I
Okay.
wanna do something with the ordinance. So that's where I'm just confused as to why they said they wouldn't wanna take that.
I think we pushed, not pushed, is the wrong term. We recommended these changes because to us, it makes more sense to have the planning board who's already looking at land use issues.
So the rationale behind it is that in terms of like going through a conditional use type review of the property, because now there's resource protection or lack thereof. And so it becomes more of like, it needs to undergo the standards, what do you call them? The things that you have to be able to, is it standards?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so
Okay.
that part of it doesn't change. I
Right.
mean, just because they come to the planning board, it's not an automatic yes,
Right.
or it was, you know. if it
But
went
those
to
are the
two.
types of things that you would be
Yeah.
reviewing, and the appeals board is saying they don't feel equipped to provide that
I
kind
think
of
they
review.
feel we're the better person to do that, so, but now, it's early in the process, and so we're gonna develop them, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I guess, I think I'm having a little problem with, if you're not meeting the ordinance, which you guys are charged with looking at projects in relation to how the ordinance is written, and if you're going beyond that, I believe it has to go to appeals at that point.
It does
and
not-
that- And so I'd be careful as you're looking, I get what you're trying to do to, and I don't disagree that the planning board is probably better equipped to look at the whole picture than the appeals board is. But I think the final decision, and this is where I think you need to split the hairs, the final decision needs to be the appeals board based on maybe what the planning board comes up with.
It-
I think it's
for
two
a-
distinct things. Sorry.
But I think that you gotta be careful there, because you wanna, I'll say, separate church and state there a little bit, and keep that separation.
I see it
So-
as two distinct things. The ordinance allows for a permit for you to do something up to 30%. So when you get a permit in town, most of the permits go through the planning board, with the exception of the road commissioner, stuff like that. If you want to do something outside of what is allowed in a permit, it goes to the appeals board, because you're appealing it. So
Right.
it seems very clear to me
Well-
that if you're trying to do something different than the permit,
And-
you're appealing.
Unless I'm mistaken, the way it used to work is you'd always present the project to the planning board. The planning board would reject your project at that point, and then you hit appeals. It's not straight to appeals you go.
Yeah, but again, I think this is different in the resource protection. And I think that the difference is that right now, if you want to increase it 29%, you come, whether it's an appeal or not, but you go to the planning board to do it.
Well,
The
it's not an
difference
appeal,
here,
It's a condition of the.
I feel like we're talking about stuff that's not before us, that is
I
way
agree.
in the future, and
I'm just putting the caution out there.
I'll take your
Okay,
caution
yeah.
back. I mean, I will do that. So having poorly done those, are there any other questions?
Have you guys engaged at all with GP Cog about ways they can help with the ordinance? Because I know like at the last meeting where there was the public hearing, there was some misunderstanding of what the current legislation was framing out, whether the proposed ordinance that the town was working on at the time even met legal requirements. There's a back and forth between a couple board members and a back and forth between a couple members of the public. And I know that GP Cog fully understands the legal implications of the ordinance, and they will for free do presentations to planning boards or select boards on what the ordinance are, how they line out. And then there's also grant funding available for getting these ordinance written or getting extra time from planners to help get the ordinance written. So that's something that's been pursued at all?
Yeah, we have, if you talk about housing.
For the housing, yeah.
Yeah, the answer is yes. They've not been, I think as the state, there was a great deal of confusion throughout the state up until now. And I think that, but we have used MMA to George's, and we've run past all, way back in the day, these changes. Then we do have, and thanks for asking, because we do have, MMA has looked at his broad draft changes and said that it's okay. That as it's written now, they think it's within the rules. So we've used MMA to that extent.
And so does he have a few options that he's pulled together for you all?
It's gonna be, another good question, it's gonna be one option this time. So last time we had 3, vote on it, the goal is to say, present to the town, this is the option.
In your first, like, if you were gonna do a survey, the plan is to put out one
One
option
option.
as a survey?
Yeah, and we'll discuss that. And there's, yes, rather than, we think it got very confusing. We also, this is based upon what we heard on the last survey, which is, as I said, 51% said we want to have more land if it's you're adding extra single-family homes. The other said, let's make it easier, and being broad, general, make it easier. We want to make it easier for our kids or whatever to live in town. So this is and every time you hybrid something, it's becomes an electrical vehicle, the charge dies out after 20 miles. But don't tell my brother-in-law I said that. So I think, to answer your question, I think we've taken those comments. We're not planning, but there will be ample opportunity for the public to weigh in on that process.
Do you have another question, Heather?
I just wanted to, just put this out there as a reminder that we will have the option as a municipality to ask for reimbursement for time
Yes.
related to this project, and so even this meeting tonight for your time counts. And so I talked to Jerry briefly about having a system to record this kind of stuff, but this is stuff that we can get reimbursed for, and so I think it's important.
And George is already tracking his hours,
Yeah.
and they were already tracked, lawyer time, all of that is being recorded. I think we get up to $5,000.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yes, thank you, they're already working on that.
No, I think we've taken up this gentleman's
Yeah.
enough.
So-
all right.
I got another question. With the Conservation Commission, the solar and cell ordinance, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by, it sounds like you're wanting to suggest that we break up the development of the ordinance into two blocks, one that's worked on this year, and one that's worked on next year?
Yes, I think this year would be, so if someone came into the town today and wanted to put in a solar project, we have no standards on acreage, we have no standards on buffers, we have no
Yeah,
on
I
heights,
understand.
all those kinds.
Yeah.
So if they, I hate to use the word, and we've had, I guess, inquiries about doing that. So we just want to put something out there that says, if you're gonna do that, this is what you have to buffer it. If it's along a 136 or at Stackpole or Bowie Hill or wherever, and it's a wide open field, here's our expectation for a buffering. If you're driving into Auburn, on the left-hand side, just as you go past Penley Corner, there's a big, which is very hard to see because there's a natural buffer there. And so I don't know if that was there before, but those are the kinds of details we'd work on this year.
And what would be the goal for the details for next year?
If we thought it was necessary to define better where they might go.
So this year would be more so the actual ordinance design, like this, if it's this size, it needs to be buffered, if it's that size, it needs to be buffered. Whereas
Height, noise.
next year could potentially be, areas that are not allowed to have solar at all versus areas that
If
are.
that's where we want to go, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cause I think that's a fair approach, just to really figure out the, not necessarily like, this is pro-solar corner of town, this is the no solar corner of town, but to say, in areas outside of RP, here's what the project would have to look like, so. I know that there's,
They could go-
ample opportunity for the, Conservation Commission and Planning Board to talk with several local municipalities developed. stuff,
George has
so,
given a bunch
yeah.
of draft
It
ordinances.
could be as easy as changing one town's name to Durham at the top and
It
voting
would,
on it.
that would be my wish
Yeah.
on a lot of these.
All right. Well, thank you, John.
All right, thank you all.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Appreciate it.
You have a great night. Appreciate you coming out. Okay, managers report. Jerry is absent this evening. Jessica, do you have anything
Yep,
to add this
we have
evening?
one thing that occurred yesterday. We were
Yep.
notified by the CDC that we had a confirmed case of rabies in
Mhm.
town. It was in a woodchuck. Our animal control officer has been notified. I notified Chief this morning because
Okay.
he's our health and safety officer. We have information about it on our website and we have posters hung in a lot.
Great, thank you, and hopefully everybody was okay with that. Nobody got bitten, but,
Yeah, I just have limited information.
all right, great, thank you.
In reference to the information that you have and you may or may not know, do you know an approximate location of?
No, I
in town?
asked, it's not, no, they didn't
Okay.
give us anything, I
Yep.
know, that would be helpful, because Durham's large, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that if people are asking about it, it is, I would say it is likely the woodchuck got bit by something that had rabies, so it's likely there's something else with rabies in town. But it's also likely that any given point in time in the town of Durham, there's a wild animal that has rabies, so I wouldn't say we have to, put all the alarms out for this, it's, it's gonna be there, but just remind people, be careful with your animals.
I'm just curious, and I mean, I could even call the state and ask, I'm curious if it was that, like, someone saw this animal presenting rabid, like, symptoms, or if it was just a random testing that the state does of areas to try to find out where outbreaks might be. Do you know? Do
No,
they-
I just have this really
I
brief.
feel, yeah, but do you know?
I think that the testing is would likely have been done opportunistically if someone thinks something,
Okay.
suspects something of being rapid,
Okay.
but.
Right.
And the state, to my knowledge, the state doesn't drive around scooping up roadkill and testing for rabies.
Yeah, I agree. I had, believe it or not, I had some experience with this in Durham about 8, 9 years ago. We had my neighbor had a raccoon basically going to a party he was having and attacked them, and they had to fend it off with a baseball bat. Long story short, the raccoon didn't do too well. I was not at the party, but in that area, the local, it's probably not a game warden, but Fish and Wildlife officer came by and knocked on everybody's door in the street and said, hey, if you touch this particular animal when it was on the road or your kids, please be advised, things like that. So they do some outreach.
Yeah.
At least they did, so I think most of the people that know about it, if it was in somebody's yard or something, probably have been.
I just wondered, like, in terms
Yeah.
of like the, like hand, foot, and mouth, for example, right? The state does track where outbreaks are, and I wondered if the rabies thing was similar to that or not, but that, I'm not
I think he's
expecting
right.
you to know the answer to that
I
question.
think any animal running around here, you should just assume that it has rabies,
Right.
and you should leave it alone.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think what generally happens is kinda like, friends
Yeah.
boxing match with the raccoon.
Yeah.
If someone has something in their backyard they think it's weird, they shoot it, they stomp on it, they drive it over, whatever they call, it gets tested. The people who need to know are contacted, did you touch it, this and that, oh yeah, well, my cousin was over, okay, we'll go touch it. I don't see this as a major concern for the
No.
town attorney.
All right,
Don't play with
Great.
stray animals.
That's a good
I think
point.
all our moms told us that when we were kids.
yeah, I know. All right. Thank you, Jessica, appreciate that. All right, Union Church Committee appointments, I believe we had one additional
Have one
application
application that came in yesterday.
that wasn't distributed on the email. If you wanted to share that, we could all look at it quickly, and then we could,
Were we gonna discuss before we vote on the members of the committee, just sort of a,
rough,
direction of what their goal is or responsibility, so that we can have that on,
paper?
in a recorded vote, so that they're not running roughshod over whatever they want, we can sort of give direction?
We can do that. If we want to do that really quickly, I think we can probably come up with some outline. I did look at, I'm gonna pull it back up. I did look at the, I'm already back through these already. I did look at what we had on the website, and it's, I'll say, at a high level, it seemed pretty inclusive. But if we want to further put an outline together, we could do that. Or, yeah, just let us, we can have a little discussion about that and go from there. How's that?
Well, if we already have it,
I'm
I guess I'm
trying-
not, there's been multiple discussions about us not having direction for the board, so.
I'm going there now, I'm just looking at the weekly news blast. So what we had in the weekly news blast, let it load up here. Where did I go? Of course, I should have saved it up here earlier.
Which one was the one that did it?
All right,
Yeah, I know. She missed that.
so you,
99%
you,
sure.
I'm gonna ask the question.
It says here, so the
Wait,
town of Durham
Here's
is
the
looking
minutes.
for residents to form an Old Town Hall / Union Church Committee to discuss and develop a plan / vision for this historic building. Built in, and then some details about the building. So the duration of this committee will run until a long-range plan has been developed and approved by the town. If you're interested, you can apply. So again, it seems like it's the whole broad, like, bring us a plan. This says run until a plan has been developed. I'm a big advocate for tripwires, run until the plan's developed before you hit 9 months, and if you haven't got it done in 9 months, we need to reassess,
New
like.
committee, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
new
it's just
committee.
one of those things, is you can spend every
Yeah.
week talking, you spend hours talking about what color paint could potentially go if you do this or that. I just think it'd be better
I-
to build in a timeframe.
I,
By December 31, we want something done, and if not, we're gonna figure out something else to figure it out.
I would strongly agree with that one.
So,
Go ahead.
I would like to make a suggestion that we include or appoint 2 advisory members that don't vote, and one of those, at least one of those be from this board. Maybe I'm making a motion, or we can talk about it. What do we have to do? Talk about that if I bring it up that way? Make a motion to talk about that?
I think that might be in the outline of what you're trying to achieve, and like if we're setting up an outline of what their mission is and who all is gonna, how many members are gonna participate, how many outside members, for example, of what you just said, advisory members are gonna participate, that would be in what I would call the write-up of what they're tasked to do and what the mission of this particular committee per se. You guys have heard my spiel before on this, and I think you've had issues with this in the past. I think when select board gets involved, or members of the select board get involved with a specific committee, it always looks like, even if they don't say a word in these meetings, there's an influential part of them being on that. And I think committees sometimes feel the pressure of a board member per se, especially if they voice their opinion. So if you were, let's say you were on that board and you said, well, I think it should be as an advisory member, it's just sometimes the optics, and I think you've shared that in the past, you don't like that.
Yeah.
I get the vibe of your point. I think I get what you're saying, though, is that essentially maybe if there's someone there that's not voting to say, we need to keep things moving, we got 6 months here, but I can also see the optics of like, oh, did the board go this way because Joe or the other Joe was the
Right.
advisor, you know,
So, I don't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt, you had brought that up and suggested that, so what was your line of thinking in terms of somebody on this board being either a voting or non-voting member on that committee?
When there was an odd, even number of applicants, we now have
Right.
9.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, my thought on this is you've got, like, I have it as like, been thinking about this lately, but like 4 major, things to think about here. You've got your building upgrades, just to looking at the plan that we want these folks, regardless of who's on that committee, and how we do that. You got your building upgrades, your codes you need to adhere to, your state and federal codes for access. You get your long-term uses that need to be looked at, and then we need proposals. So you don't need to have so many subjects. I don't want to make it too many subjects, just we need the committee to focus on what we do with this building, and then how do we upgrade it appropriately for those uses, and then meet the codes along the way, so that it's usable by the entire public.
That's way beyond, I thought, my vision of this was make a recommendation of what we do with this building. Just,
but-
do we
but you-
give it away, sell it, move it?
Well, that's the proposal part,
Yeah.
right? That's at the end, after you put those in those multiple categories you just indicated, then I want, all right, well, how does that benefit the town? And that can benefit the town in a number of ways. It can benefit monetarily, it can benefit from services, right? People get services by having that building, or something else. I don't wanna name, I mean, that's the whole idea of the committee, is to come up with this plan that actually lays that out for us on almost like a menu type thing. Then the town can make an educated decision, is, yeah, do we really wanna keep this building? Do we wanna go and let one of the committees own that building later? Do we wanna do other things with it? Do we wanna move it down the street? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think it's wide open. I think everybody has a desire to use that building in some manner. but we need folks to put that on paper and propose back to us so that we can share it with the town as to what are the items that we're proposing. I think not doing the homework on all those items, you limit your view of the decision on that. I think that comes out of it, Josh, but so I don't disagree, but I think you have to go through all those steps. Go ahead. No, you can disagree with me. It's okay. Heather?
I would definitely be interested in knowing the information, and I think the public would be interested in knowing the information in terms of what costs would look like for the building to be able to be used by the public versus what another option would be if it's an astronomical cost for the building to be used by the public. I think that those things need to exist to be able to make an educated decision.
I agree.
So I think that this is what we just tasked the committee with. You know, you have 9 months, bring to us a recommendation, and that's part of what you're talking about, is rather than getting into details, we pick the right people for the job and, you know, diversify command there, you let them get it figured out. If they start going down the wormhole and they realize it's gonna be $4 million to get this thing up to code or whatever, that, and they decide that that's what they think should be done, they present it to us, we accept or reject. So I think that some of these details is, that's why we're picking
Yep.
these people.
I
So
agree.
I would just move that we create this committee of an uneven number of people to make a recommendation for the best way to use the Union Church within, and make the recommendation within the next 9 months.
The only thing I would say is, I know we have an uneven number now.
Is that a motion?
I mean, I did make a motion. so-
Was there a motion?
Yeah, I
I'll,
said,
I'll
didn't hear his
second
motion.
so that we can
Sorry.
discuss
Yeah.
All
a
right,
second.
second
Yeah.
on that motion, all right,
Mhm.
discussion?
so.
Rich?
I think that's good.
Mhm.
The only thing I would just give more, how the committee is structured, as far as example, we have 9 applicants, I believe now, so maybe 7 are voting members, 2 are alternates, or something of that nature.
I would accept a friendly motion, a friendly amendment.
Or,
So my
You know what I
motion
mean?
is 7 members, 2, whatever that works for me.
Josh, I wanna hear what you have to say, I can tell that you have something to say.
Well, I think you need to accept the amendment first.
I accept the amendment, second,
Okay,
whatever needs to
amendment.
happen.
I mean, my question is, I keep hearing 9 months, that puts us in May,
Yeah. I know.
and you can do math. You can do math.
Well, it's gotta be before April 1st, right?
Well, that's,
No, you can't include
so-
April.
So 6 months,
so, I mean,
to be able to have something more
Look.
ready.
Yeah.
Just December 31st.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe my recommendation would be that we have the committee in place for 4 months with the ability to extend it for 2 months to complete the required goals.
So
And
you're
that puts us in
saying,
February, and that puts us, by February 1st, so maybe not.
so are you saying essentially in 4 months, they would come to us, make a presentation, and then we could say, that sounds good, but clean it up a little bit over the next 2 months?
I'm actually thinking 3 months, but that's just me.
Yeah.
Well, that's, I mean,
I know how this
I-
goes.
Yeah, I made the
Someone else
motion
said
to get the
December
ball
31st.
moving here, if we need to
Yeah.
amend it, that's
So,
fine by me.
I'm good with either one, to
Yeah.
be honest with you. I do think there should be a time change, because this could go on for years on end.
Yeah.
It needs to be, I mean, you're gonna have to, I mean, what I envision is this board's gonna go out and say, here are our options of what we can do with the building, and then go out and get estimates as to cost.
Mhm.
Not paint color and this or that, or,
Yeah.
but this is what the cost is, and then come back, give us a presentation, and then the 5 of us will say, okay, how do we justify spending X number of dollars to repair this building that, my parents are up from Florida, and my father and I, when I was a kid, would go to cities and just walk around and look at buildings. My uncle's an architect, loves old buildings. Well, what do we do with that building? It's,
Yeah.
you know, that's what we need to figure out.
Mhm.
That's what they're tasked with, making a recommendation. And that should be able to be done 3-4 months.
All right, I'll amend my motion to say, I move that we create this committee comprising of 9 members, 7 voting, 2 alternates, to present us with a option to move forward in 4 months, and then have an additional 2 months to get the remaining details per input from the select board.
In that two,
Let's-
a second,
good.
second.
Yeah.
In that 2-month timeframe, does everyone else agree that getting public input before we would go to town? I think that there has to be the option to get public input before we go to town meeting on a warrant question of
Well-
what, or a budget question.
So their meetings would be open to the public, and so what, 4 months would put us, at our first or second meeting in December. And then 2 additional months would put us in the first or second meeting in February.
Yeah.
And then we could have the public meeting in March. So I think that
Yeah, I
gives
think
them,
that 2-month period is when that would come into play, contingent upon what the recommendation is. I mean, if they say the recommendation is leave as is, we might say, okay, we're accepting that, I'm not saying we would, but we accept that recommendation, there's no need for a public input or whatever. But I think based off what we hear in 4 months, and we let someone else do the work, because we all have other stuff we gotta do, we then decide, yeah, this sounds like reasonable, get this information, get public input.
So the only other thing to think about when we're talking about the timeline is that this potentially, unless the only question that's going out at this time is the question of what it's going to be used for, is that if it has a budgetary implication to it, that it has to go through the budget process. So that's the only other thing to consider in terms of a timeline.
I don't know if it would have to go through a budget process, but depending upon the amount, it might have to go through a CIP process.
Right, it would be a capital improvement, would more than likely
Yeah,
what
I
it would
mean,
come out as.
and I don't think my expectation isn't, we're gonna vote at town meeting, and this is what we're gonna do. It's this is the proposal, do you support it or not? With what's would happen, and then we go out and I think whatever we do would have to be done at the 2025 town meeting.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking on the same timeframe there.
Okay,
I think the first one would just be more for information.
okay, I think
Yeah.
that that's,
And I think that this is part of
Reasonable.
that public process. We opened it up for people to join the committee. They have the opportunity, we got applicants, they're gonna be given a timeline, they're gonna get feedback. So I think that that's the public process up front. And then we can add something in those 2 months and then figure out what to move forward with.
Unless someone comes up and says, I'll do this for you if you do it now, the exceptions to the rule, but that's.
No, but I think you're right, though, we will have to take to the next year, to
In
the
order.
2025.
Yeah.
So because the last thing you wanna do on a historical building is look like you microwave the process.
Right.
And-
So you gotta be careful.
And we can't put the horse before the cart. I mean, in the sense of like, we don't know what the recommendation's gonna be, so it could involve capital improvement, it could involve budget, it could involve none of that. So it's like,
Right,
how we move forward depends on what the recommendation
Right.
Yep.
is.
get input on, get the public to vote on the plan, and then
and
fund it the following.
your 7-2 is just because you think it's too many people?
Oh,
Or
I mean,
what?
both, first of all, you typically do a board like that, you all have an alternate, somebody might take a vacation, then you're down to 8, or vice versa, so I think, if there were 7 people that applied, I'd make it a 5 with 2 alternates,
Okay.
so it's just, in my opinion, it's just good practice.
Okay.
I agree with Rich on that. We need the 2 alternates and then it's.
Can we move this question and then talk about the applications after?
Yep, we can. Okay,
We have a
So-
convoluted amended motion.
so
Can
I've
you
got.
read it the way, are you gonna?
Yeah, let
okay.
me see if I get this right, and then you guys can correct me. So, I've got a motion on the table to form a committee for the, Union Church, committee for 7 voting members and 2 alternates, with a 4-month duration, with a report out, with options for use of the Union Church. And then we would have a 2-month public input time input before, public meeting. That's the motion I had on the table, unless anybody has a change to
No,
that.
I think that's right. I think my math was wrong, though. I think we'd be talking about the November meeting and January meeting would be the extra 2 months. And I don't know, and I personally would like to put that, but just be clear so nobody quotes and says
I mean, if it starts, 4 months start in August, September, October.
well, I think it starts
November.
today.
Right, so it'll start as soon as we can assemble the people and get them a meeting time,
It
so.
might be
Yeah.
very in-depth, I don't know
Yeah.
what's gonna transpire on
Yeah,
this.
so we just gotta get moving, because we don't know what they're gonna do.
Yeah,
Right.
you might have to
So-
extend their commission.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So when we say the use,
Yeah.
are we saying, do we want cost associated with making it usable? Or are we just saying the use?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we got a motion.
Yeah, I'm just asking for clarity on the motion. Is that what, in this motion, are we saying that it includes financial?
My intent of the motion was in 4 months, they tell us what they think should be done. And then if we have additional questions about cost and logistics and stuff like that, they have that 2 month period to figure it out. So at some point, it's like, we can get into the nitty gritty of like, figure this out, figure that out. Like I say, have them bring us something in 4 months, and then we can give them that 2 months of additional feedback, and then they bring it to us.
Okay, so.
If the use is get rid of it, move it, fix it, and then we say 4 months from now.
So
What's the
is
cost
that
of that? What's the-
reasonable in a 2 month timeframe to
Listen,
have?
I don't wanna,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to
Yeah,
interject,
go
John,
ahead,
but
go ahead, please.
we got a motion, we had a second, we can't keep deliberating
Right.
on this. We either vote it down and start over, or we vote.
Right.
It's one or the other.
So we don't discuss once a motion?
We already had discussion.
Yeah, the discussion, and I reread the
Just reread the
motion, and
motion.
that's it, we were gonna vote. I was about to vote at that point,
Yeah, I think what would help is we
so.
formally enter in discussion, and then that would solve the issue. And then if someone doesn't want the discussion, just move the previous question.
Well, we passed the discussion phase. So,
Yeah, I didn't know we had left discussion. It was a repeat of the motion for clarification, like a point of clarification.
I think Josh, he said, can we move the question? And
Right,
I-
which is
that
what-
escaped me,
yeah,
but
which is what
I
we're doing.
apologize, that's
So-
my mistake.
No, it's fine, we just need to do one or the other.
Right.
I'm fine either way,
So-
we can have more discussion.
All in favor of the motion? All opposed?
I'm just abstaining.
I have one abstain. Okay, so motion passes. Okay. Next order of business is,
Or we're still on the committee, right? So
yeah,
I think, I would ask Mr. Chair if we could go into executive session, because I think we need, if we're appointing the 9 members, do we need to appoint the 7 voting and 2 non-voting?
Yes,
Which
yes,
is
we do.
my concern about
So-
that, but
so.
I think we need.
We do. Why don't we go through the rest, and we'll do executive session at the end, as it is in the agenda? I don't think we
So
have
we'll
to-
take.
Yeah, you
so
just move
I'll
this
make-
to executive.
So
session.
I'll make a motion to move agenda item number 7
Oh.
to executive session to make the appointments. Or discuss the appointments. Cause we're gonna take that out of order, correct?
Yeah, the way I understand is that we have executive session built in there, and if at any point we can move something and say, I wanna move this to executive session. So you just say, I
I
wanna
don't-
move the appointment to executive
I don't
session.
think,
I think you can go into executive session anytime you need to.
Yeah,
It's,
so, okay.
that's there in
So
case
make
there's
a-
personnel issues that need to be addressed or something.
so we can,
Josh is correct.
yeah, go into executive session.
Wait a second.
All
Can
right.
I record
Write it down.
this?
Write it down.
I'm gonna record.
I'll send you text.
July
That's fine.
11th, 8:03.
You actually, if you're with the town manager, I don't think you have to be excluded from this.
No, you can, because
Yeah, you
you're.
can, yeah.
Yeah, but I think
So-
she's getting up to go shut the camera.
No, I know that, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
Well, we have to vote on
We
it.
have
I have to vote on that first. So
Second.
I hear a motion
Second.
to go into executive session. I got a second from Joe. All in favor in the usual manner? Okay, we're going into executive session to talk about union church committee appointments. We will be back. Stay tuned.
You get a second, you move into discussion.
Yeah.
If the discussion's moving on and you're tired of discussion, someone can move the previous question.
Yeah.
But that actually requires a vote, so you move the previous question and everyone votes whether
Yeah.
to
Move-
move it,
move it.
Discussion
vote
in
yes,
this
then you
particular one.
immediately go into
Right,
vote.
but in this
Yeah.
particular one, he started to read.
I
The
read
discussion
it,
was over,
yeah,
and he
so-
read it.
Yeah, so.
All right, we're
that's
back
my
online?
clarification.
No,
I
thank you.
I
All right.
forgot
Yes.
that Josh said move the
Yeah.
question,
Right.
that, I own that was on me.
All right, so,
No biggie.
all right, no biggie. All right, we're out of executive session here, and I'd like to, Josh is gonna provide a motion here on our decisions.
Yes, I move that we appoint Neil Barry, John Talbot, Tyler Hutchinson, Emily Alexander, Lois Kilby Chesley, William Schneider, and Paula Erdman Purdy as the 7 members of the Union Church Committee. And, how do you say her last? DeSipkis. Candace DeSipkis be appointed as alternate number 1 and Tia Wilson as alternate number 2 to the Union Church Committee that we've.
And do I have, I got Joe as a second? All right, any discussion, further discussion? No, all in favor? All right, and all opposed, that's carries with a full vote, 5-0. All right, that's great, thank you.
Thank you
Everybody?
to all of
All
those
right.
people who put
Yeah.
in applications and are gonna
Absolutely.
take that task on, it's an important one, we
Yeah.
definitely appreciate that.
Big task here ahead of us here. All right, consent agenda, let's see, I'll take a motion for.
So moved.
Approving the consent agenda, second by Joe, Josh. All in favor in the usual manner? Okay, all opposed, that passes. Upcoming town meetings, we have a select board meeting on 7/25, and then, and on 8/8 at the town office, are the only 2 meetings to note. And we've already done executive session, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, except we haven't signed warrants, is it fine to adjourn if we haven't signed
Yeah,
yet?
that was the question I had last time, can we adjourn and then sign, or?
We've done it a million times.
Yeah, we've
Okay.
already,
We also
we've
have
already
to sign
voted.
these.
Yeah,
I'll
we
make
got
a
a,
motion,
go ahead.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? Josh seconds. All in favor? We are adjourned. Don't leave until you sign.